Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Alright, so today we're going to be going your Chapter 12 review, the North and Industry. We did cover 5 vocabulary words: reform, technology, the transportation revolution, industry, and the industrial revolution. You have to remember here that before the industrial revolution, people were doing things by hand. They were making things by hand. They were trading. They were bartering. And then all of a sudden we had this way to start mechanizing things. And this is where the Industrial Revolution takes place. You remember correctly, it happened first over in Britain with the textile industry. They were setting up their factories by water, so you would have like rivers and streams being the source of their energy, and they would turn these water wheels, which would in turn, spin a gear and then a rod, and then it would, crush grain, and it would go into ultimately, like I said, the textile industry, and that's how the United States gets into the technological revolution or the industrial revolution. You have to remember correctly that the War of 1812, the Embargo Act, the Non-Intercourse Act, with Thomas Jefferson putting all that into place and James Madison leading us in the War of 1812, Americans realized that they were relying too much on British goods. And even with the Embargo Act and the Non-Intercourse Act making it so we couldn't trade with Britain anymore, then you have these, Americans sitting there saying, hey, if we can't rely on them anymore, we're going to have to start doing it ourselves. So you have the northern economy that is going to be based on these factories. We have the Lowell Mill girls in Lowell, Massachusetts, starting the textile industry in America. And we're going to have lots of factories. People are going to be moving into cities, and they're going to be working at these factories. The Industrial Revolution affects the production of goods greatly because you used to have to do it by hand, and now with Eli Whitney inventing interchangeable parts, you have the process or the production of goods being made faster, cheaper, and more efficient. That's definitely something you're going to have to know. Make sure you understand that. The Industrial Revolution makes the productions of goods faster, cheaper, and more efficient. Here's how it works, right? If you have to make a widget, let's say we're in the widget business, and it takes us 2 to 3 days to make a widget. Let's just say 3 days, right? Let's make it solid days. So it's 3 days for us to make a widget. Now, we're going to sell that widget for $10 because it takes us 3 days to make that widget, and we want to make sure that we're going to get paid because it's going to take us another 3 days to make another widget. Well, when you start having interchangeable parts, meaning that if you create a widget and it breaks, instead of building another widget for 3 days, you can just replace that part and you don't have to create another one. That's kind of the more efficient part. So that's where interchangeable parts comes in. But when you're talking about faster and cheaper, now all of a sudden you create machines that makes these widgets. And these widgets are now made 10, 20 per day. You can sell them for a lot less money because you're making so many more of these widgets. Okay, so that's the idea of the Industrial Revolution and the effects, this industrialization effect on the United States of America. And like I said, remember, it started in Britain, and then it comes over here to America, and it starts in the textile industries, especially up in the north. You have the southern states that are, getting this raw cotton, the raw material. They're shipping it out to Britain. They're shipping it up to the north. And these textile industries are really putting forth the effort and the factories in order to make these products, make these shirts, make these blankets, make these pants for the people of the United States. We're going to talk about inventors, and we're going to talk about our effects, especially the big one, Eli Whitney and his cotton gin. You have to remember that slavery was technically on the decline before the invention of the cotton gin, right? You have slaves in the South who were picking all this cotton, and they can only pick and process, 10, 15 pounds a day, per a couple of slaves. And now that you have the cotton gin, it makes it more efficient, right? You have a whole handful, or maybe even up to 100 slaves who are processing this cotton and picking the seeds out of the cotton, and it's taking a long time, so it's not very profitable. But now, because Eli Whitney came in and invented this cotton gin, Now it's crazy to think that, hey, I don't need as many slaves to process the cotton because we can get it done so much faster, so much more efficiently. However, with that being said, now that they were able to produce the cotton and the cotton for production, the fact that they have processed it, now they needed more slaves because they were planting more cotton. So you see how that works? So now that you had more cotton being planted, you need more slaves to harvest the cotton in order to be able to keep that cotton gin working. So the cotton gin helps expand the textile industry. You have Eli Whitney, making the interchangeable parts idea that, like I said, remember, if a cotton gin, if it took him 5 days to build a cotton gin, well, if one broke, he'd have to spend 5 more days building another one. But the fact that he was able to mass produce the same part over and over and over again, like for muskets, which is what he first used it for, if you're on a battlefield and your pin breaks on a musket, except for having to wait for somebody to die to go get their musket or run back to find another musket somewhere, you can just replace that pin because he produces like hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of that same pin, because they know that it breaks on all these muskets. So that's the idea of interchangeable part. Let's find this part that's going to wind up breaking all the time. Let's make it and make it and make it and make it over and over again. So instead of having to replace the whole thing, like the whole musket or the whole cotton gin, we can just replace that part. So that was the idea of interchangeable parts. You have to remember, we have the agricultural revolution with Cyrus McCormick creating the mechanical reaper. Now you can harvest all that wheat with the mechanical reaper. John Deere getting sick and tired of those iron plows that are soft and brittle and breaking all the time. He creates a steel plow, right? And you have to remember, again, these are done to make processing, make production, make goods faster, cheaper, and more efficient, right? So I remember I told you before that in Britain they were creating their factories by rivers. Well, you have to remember that during this industrial revolution we have now a steam engine as a new power source. Now these factories can leave the water, leave the streams, leave the rivers, and head into more urban areas, more city areas. So now these cities become epicenters for the Industrial Revolution. They no longer have to be by rivers. Now they can be in cities and make cities and urban areas factory, labor, mass production of goods areas. They can be the epicenter of the factories and industrialization itself. You have to remember that these jobs that Americans and immigrants later on go in for, there's no skill to them. You don't have to have a skill. You just have to press a button. You have to move a part. And that was the great thing about industrialization and factory jobs. People were able to move off farms. They were able to move off of doing hard labor outside to go into a building now to be able to do something that you didn't need an education for. You didn't need a skill for. You could press a button. That's good because many more people could work, but it's bad because that means anybody could take your job. And you'll see when we get into nativism and immigration that that's one thing that Americans are going to have to worry about. So what happens with the cities now? The cities become places of filth. They become, dirty, disgusting, overcrowded. People don't like living there. It's gross. They're getting jam-packed. Now you have cities with thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. People are getting very unsatisfied with their livelihood. They didn't like living in the urban jungle. You had people dying at their work, so you have the introduction of labor unions, and labor unions were the ones that really stood up and fought. Remember, it's like if you just poke somebody with one finger, it doesn't hurt, but if you use all your fingers together, it does make a difference. The last thing we're going to cover here is revolutions, communication, transportation. Remember what I said, whenever there was an industrial revolution, there was a communication and a transportation revolution. Communication revolution, you have to remember Samuel Morse with the telegraph. Him and his associates create the Morse code, series of dots and dashes on that electrical unit. Robert Fulton created the steamboat, right? It was very dangerous. A lot of them exploded, but it made traveling up and down rivers a lot faster. You had the Peter Cooper and his Tom Thumb, the first real steam engine railroad in the United States. Remember, he raced a horse, and unfortunately the horse beat him because the railroad broke down. But people were like, wow, you can transport this many people on a railroad train, and we can go that fast. Man, that's amazing. So you have to remember, now we're starting talking about the Transcontinental Railroad, where we have in 1860 about 30,000 miles of railroad track, about 22,000 in the north and only 8,000 in the south. You'll see that come out to be a benefit to the north during the Civil War. You have to remember that the Transcontinental was met in Promontory, Utah, and they drove that golden spike like a big thick golden nail into the ground. They celebrated, they took pictures, they drank champagne, but remember, they did take that spike out and put it in a museum. So you have really the railroad now bringing the United States closer, being trade faster. And remember what I said, you could take anything that we talked about here and put it into 3 words: faster, cheaper, and more efficient.